is the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
Welcome back to the Electile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. I'm Ashton Cohen. Very pleased to be joined today by one of my favorite commentators about money, economics, and Bitcoin. His name is Jeff Booth. Jeff is an entrepreneur and author of the excellent new book, The Price of Tomorrow, Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. Jeff, thanks so much for being with me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Ashton.
Appreciate it. So your book, obviously, the title is very apt right now. When did you start writing it, by the way?
Wrote it in 2018, 2019,
Okay.
Released it in January of 20, just before kind of COVID and money printing going off the charts and everything else.
So very prescient book, obviously, then.
People say that.
Yeah. So, obviously we're seeing record inflation in the United States. The official numbers have it as the most in 40 years. Obviously, they've changed the CPI since the last time we had such record levels of inflation. So it may be very well the highest ever. And you see Americans are thinking about, particularly I think in my age group, inflation was not something anyone really ever thought about, and not in the United States at least. Obviously in Argentina, in Latin America, and so many parts of Asia, this is something that people have had to grapple with. In America, we've largely been insulated from some of those consequences. And we all know that what we're experiencing right now is horrible, and we don't like it. But we've also always been told that by, let's say, the Federal Reserve, who's maintained a 2% inflation rate. We've always been told this, a little bit of inflation is good for society, it's good for the economy, keeps things going. All the really smart people, PhDs, have told us that even this most recent bout of inflation, we were told originally was good for us. So what's wrong with that argument that at the very least, at least a little bit of inflation is good, and we should be targeting for that? And in addition, the more money we print and we spend, that makes us richer. What's wrong with those arguments?
Yeah, so I like to investigate things at first principles. And so to wonder, why is inflation, why have we been told inflation, 2% inflation is good for us? Because it's saying this, losing money every year is good for you, right? Or transferring a hidden tax by government to transfer your wealth from savers to spenders or to asset holders is good for you. And so that hidden theft in a monetary base, you kind of have to investigate that at first principles and ask why. Why is that? Why is that true, and why do people believe it? And it sets up what I talked about in the book. Technology is a driving force in all of our lives. We use it every day. It drives our productivity up and labor costs down. And by using it, what we're using right now can touch millions of people all over the world. Couldn't have seen this because we couldn't have done this 20 years ago because the cost would have been so high. So we use this technology all day long. It's around us all day long, and it's being woven into every piece of society. So if that was the case, and it drives that productivity enhancement, and it's on our phones, and that's why we use our phones and all the apps, and it's driving all the costs to essentially free eventually, why are prices going up? And what you realize is you have two systems colliding against each other. One, a man-made system that is built on credit, and that credit-based system must expand forever or collapse. And when it collapses, it creates, all the credit is wiped out. And if credit is underlying the entire system, everything is wiped out. So why does that exist? It is probably, and technology has always been deflationary. And that deflation would be good for us. And we hear it's bad for us because we hear about the credit collapse, the deflationary event where the credit can't be repaid, and it has to, the Great Depression would be an example of a deflationary event. And so we now trust in governments that they can just keep on printing money and it does no harm.
Right.
And as they print money against the natural forces of prices coming down, you drive inflation in all things you need. All of the things you need most go up.
Explain that, unpack that a bit more. So why is it that, for example, housing, healthcare, now we're seeing even meat, those things seem to get the biggest brunt of the inflation, whereas, our Netflix subscription may go up $1 or something over the course of a few years.
So housing is a store of value against inflation. So it rises and rents rise with it. So people are buying housing to be able to try to transfer more wealth into that asset class from from people at the middle class and lower tiers of society that inflation is wage deflation. It's the other side of the coin. So your wages are going down in real terms. And so when you do that, and if somebody has a bunch of housing, then their rents go up to protect that.
Right.
So the asset holders and the stockholders and the wealthy get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And middle class and poor get their pockets picked at an ever increasing rate. And society breaks when there's an unfair game. Here's an easy way to look at it. If you went around the monopoly board and if you were early on the monopoly board and you got all the properties, then eventually you win that game, because when somebody's going around the board and collecting $200 isn't enough to get them around the game and anymore. And what ends up happening in the monopoly board is the board is kicked over, right? And somebody gets so pissed off that they kick the game over, and or the game resets and you start a new game. Everybody has a fresh chance. What would happen in that same monopoly board if you had all the properties, and then around the monopoly board, people couldn't get around the board with $200 anymore, and the game couldn't reset? So the government said, "We'll give you $300." The asset prices would just go up. You would get richer, right? And then they wouldn't get around the board with $300, and they would go back to the government who's creating the problem and say, "I need more money to get around the board," and they would perpetuate that problem forever. And if we go into the technical side of this, the reason we believe inflation is required for a productive society is because a hard money, like for instance gold, there was a requirement for gold to gain velocity to be able to transfer around the world at the rate of economic growth, to have a credit-based system on top of it that could move really quickly. And so what ended up happening through tons of cycles through history is gold would become a smaller and smaller part of the reserves. And you'd build a bigger and bigger credit bubble on top of it. And then eventually you'd remove gold and you would just have a fiat currency. And it provided a human incentive to keep the credit machine going. And that human incentive to essentially, because gold had to be centralized to do that, created something where you needed inflation to keep the system going. Otherwise the credit collapsed. And when the credit collapsed, and the credit collapse was all of money, every single bank, every single institution sits on top of that credit bubble. It's destruction for society. So that's why people believe it's required. But there is nothing in physics that says we can't be productive without inflation. And what ended up happening with Bitcoin as a solve to that paradox is you can gain velocity of money, essentially unlimited velocity of money, through technology. So I can beam money all over the place, and it can come back. It can do 40 hops and come back to me in 10 minutes. And so you don't have a need to develop a massive credit bubble and inflation on top of a new system based on technology. And that rewrites all the rules.
Well, why do you think that the people who, let's say, who consider themselves to be the most concerned about helping the working class or the poor, or let's say socialist types or Keynesian types, they seem to be the least worried, generally speaking, right? Fiscal conservatism is usually the ones who want to sort of cut back on spending, who want to constrain the money supply, and the polar opposite of those people are usually the ones who consider themselves socialists, and they want to increase spending, increase printing, aren't really concerned about the consequences of that. Don't really think inflation is as big of a deal. Why do you think that is? Because from what you're saying, from what's obviously the case, the inflation obviously hurts the people who are most vulnerable in society, socioeconomically, because they don't have the assets to shield themselves from the inflation.
I want to unpack a couple things you said there, because I think it's important for your listeners on both sides of the divide on the political aisle to realize that there is nothing in the political system that can solve this structural problem from the system. And if Republicans got elected and they won the House and the works and they had full control, there is actually no way that they don't print too.
Right, 100%.
Right. And so both sides, we believe we live in a free market, and we believe we live in a democracy. But 60% of taxes come through a hidden theft in money. Both parties are, and so while that is in money itself, you don't actually have a vote in the most important thing in your life, and nobody does. Why do people fall for it? Because if if you probably have more time to think about this, you're in a financial class that you can spend more time thinking about this. Some people don't. Some people are working 3 jobs trying to keep up, and their gas prices just went up by 20%, and their food prices just went up by
Right.
30%. And if you're in that class, do you listen to what I'm saying about a structural problem, or is it easier to believe it's those people's fault with all the money? And a political somebody in any political party that says, I'm going to solve it for you, and they blame a different political party and they're creating all that. And it's just easier to believe that it's a person's fault instead of a structural problem. And so that so those people will vote for essentially more and more of this, which rips apart society. And you get these us versus them all through society, because people think it's a people problem when it's a structural problem.
Well, my question was more so about the leaders in charge of, who profess to be about these, to represent the interests of the poor and the working class. Some of them have PhDs, right?
Let's take that, and let's say some of them don't know what we're talking about. So most of them don't know what we're talking about and have never investigated Bitcoin at the level that they would need to understand it solves some of the greatest issues that they care about at a structural level. But because that takes their personal power away. So if you believe that you were put on earth to help all these poor people, and they tell you you're so great, go attack the rich people, your entire feedback is feeding you misinformation, and you get caught in a lie. You get caught in an ego that I have to do this, I'm the savior. And you typically don't look at the structural problem underneath it. Some of those people, because they could, and by the way, I think it's more of this. Kodak had a lot of great executives. Why aren't they a company anymore? When they invented the digital camera. When you're in a system and you've benefited from a system and you're trying to protect a system, same as Blockbuster, Kodak, thousands of examples in business, you can't see technology has changed the system. And so what you do is you typically try to block technology in favor of the existing system. And so that's why they do it. There's a feedback from their constituents getting them elected to tell them to do it. And so they get cheers and you're doing great work, not knowing, and they don't know that they're picking the pocket of the same people that they aim to serve.
Right. Yeah. No. It's funny because we talk a lot about structural issues today, structural racism and structural this, structural that. But this is one of the biggest structural issues of all.
Ashton, that point you just made, and I've said this on many podcasts, but all money is information. People don't actually want more money. They want more of what they think the money will buy them. And so if you manipulate that information as a byproduct, you must have misinformation everywhere in society. So when you're talking about these structural issues all over society, the islands of people turning against each other and what we see in society, you can follow it all the way back to misinformation and money.
Right. You corrupt the money supply, then everything else gets corrupted. Right.
You corrupt all price signals. You corrupt all of trust between people, because you're essentially saying somebody has a right to press a button and destroy your labor or your savings. You're saying that that's okay. And so if those are the rules that society is built on, and if you're at the top of the game and you get to decide, you can create an enormous wealth for yourself by understanding how the rules of society are built on. But that comes at a cost to society and to a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, it really is true. And I think for people who doubt it's true, I think that putting it in the communist context kind of encapsulates it and elucidates it the most, when you see, how, for example, a country like Cuba, the shenanigans they play with the money over there, obviously, and the centralized planning that's involved in destroying their economic livelihoods, and then that ripples throughout all other aspects of society as well. And you can see a direct correlation between that and, morality in society and how people interact with each other as well.
Yeah, and communism and capitalism look exactly the same if money is manipulated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
because we think we have a vote in a democracy, but we actually don't have a vote in the most important thing.
Yeah, that's a profound concept. Communism and capitalism is the same if we don't have sound money, right?
So think through that narrative, which is true, what I just said, and then think about how governments will send people to war to protect an ideologue that's just that's not a truth for freedom.
Yeah.
For freedom, for capitalism,
Right.
for the
Right.
free market,
Yeah.
that is nowhere close to the truth. So when I said this is connected all the way back to sound money, it's connected to every other event.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of, what, a bit of what we saw in your home country of, with the trucker protests and stuff. It was like, shut up, we're doing this for democracy while they're infringing on democratic rights. You saw the same thing, right? It's always in the name of this ethereal virtue.
Yeah, and from my book, Ashton, because why I wrote the book is because I could see this happening. I could see this happening at a rate that was increasing because technology is moving faster and faster. So you had to, if you predicted what had to happen with monetary easing to offset that technology giving us abundance or broad-based abundance, you realized you had to capture more and more of the economic value in the state by printing money and transferring wealth from the middle class and poor to the rich. And as so it had to be exponential. It had to, as one path was, because there were competing forces, as one path was trying to drive prices down. If prices fell, then the entire credit cascade would collapse everything. So from the system, you couldn't fix it. So I realized that if you follow that trend, you could forecast the exponential amount of money printing that had to come, and all of the next order events that would come from that money printing. You could see it really clearly what would happen, and that's why, and I think that's why it became a bestseller. That's why it's traveled all over the world, because for people that have read it and understand what's happening, they're living a different environment. They're actually, and what happens is Bitcoin provides a transmission mechanism from one system to another because the system can't save itself. And so the people that understand what I just said are seeing hope, abundance, better future. In Bitcoin terms, the prices of everything fall every year.
Before we get to the Bitcoin thing, because obviously I agree with that point, but coming from somebody who follows politics, I think it's going to be a messy road between the consequences of our system and then trying to then gravitate towards Bitcoin as the lifeline. So to talk about that for a bit, let's assume that in the Western societies and many of the other societies, they don't figure out that Bitcoin can solve some of these problems, right? So this cycle continues. How does that play out if we continue in the current trajectory?
I want to be careful here because this is going to sound alarmist, and it's more thinking in first principles. I think if we continue on this path and Bitcoin doesn't succeed now, and even along that path at some point, there's a very real risk that we destroy ourselves. We've never had the technology and nuclear weapons and type of technology that we have today to start a war that can't stop. That we essentially destroy ourselves, and that's a very real risk. It's a non-zero probability,
Right.
and that probability is actually getting higher as you back people into corners, and they have to advance weapons to be a counter deterrent to what's happening, all from the destruction of money.
So the economic situation gets worse. Why will the economic situation invariably get worse under our current system?
Because the calculus of economic value comes from the division of labor all over the world. And so two things inside. So if you have division of labor all over the world, so I can be an entrepreneur, you can be a dentist, somebody else can be a metal worker. We used to have to be in a small tribe where we would do everything. As we expanded out and did trade all around the world, it required trust. And that trust of a currency is at the fabric of all of those divisional labors. So that's one thing. And so when you remove that trust, whether it's one country saying, your money is no good here, but that other country like Russia is a huge producer of oil and natural gas and energy,
Right.
then how do you can't cut them off from the society and take their energy. And all of this is a trade. It's just a trade, and it's based on trust all over the world. And so if you break that trust all over the world, then and you have to keep breaking that trust over the world from the structure, then what ends up happening is politicians, to enable that, have to create a different narrative that it's those bad people that we're going to invade to be able to bring freedom. It's all of those people. And so when we fall into that trap, or people in despair fall into that trap, and we believe those narratives. They're simple narratives to believe. It's easier to believe a person problem or a country problem than it is. We don't look at the negative externality. Here's a negative externality. It's a really simple negative externality of the U.S. dominance of global currency. U.S. can print energy for free. Every other country has to pay for energy. To be able to do that, they needed a war machine to be able to protect shipping lanes, to be able to go to Saudi Arabia and say, here's the oil, here's how we're going to price energy in US dollars, and everybody has to play on this SWIFT system globally. And if you don't want to play on the system, we're going to exclude you from financial cooperation of the world. Venezuela, Iran. And so as you do that, you develop more and more adversaries. And even your partners in that deal start to realize, as China gets stronger, they start to trade allegiances and go to where they can make the most short-term money. And again, it's all based on trust at the bottom of this. So that system can't be fixed from the system. That system typically requires a world war to fix the system. And then it starts again, and it has in history started again on a new hard money with the promise not to do it again. Bretton Woods, after World War II, was that promise, which U.S. broke in 1971 when they couldn't pay their bills and they went off the gold reserve.
Right.
And through an elegant capture, and because they were really the only superpower at the time, through an elegant capture of an oil-based market, energy, and the U.S. dollar, they were able to extend and expand dominance for another 50 years, all based on that system. And that system's breaking down today.
So, and it's all the fiat currencies. Essentially, another way of looking at it is all the fiat currencies are heading towards zero or going to get more and more devalued.
Yeah. And the U.S. will be the last one. The U.S. could get stronger before that happens, but all fiat currencies will fail.
And and the U.S. dollar will look relatively much stronger for quite some time as the weaker ones sort of go down one by one.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the global conflict.
Yeah.
That's some of the things you're talking about.
Exactly. And you can see this playing out, something I've said lots of times, which snowflake causes the avalanche.
Right.
If you think about the news cycles and what's happening, it's getting the higher and higher variability. And if you just transport yourself back 10 or 20 years ago, and if you came to today, you wouldn't believe the world is looking like this on every single issue. But you get brainwashed into that issue, and you're reading the news and you get sucked into the news without seeing the big picture of everything that's happening. And so that your first question on what's going to happen in these systems is the existing one is going to get a lot worse, and it is going to make us want to go to war with each other. And a lot of us will buy into that narrative, and hopefully enough people understand Bitcoin and start to object from that narrative and start to build a path to truth, hope, abundance.
So let's talk about that then. So how does Bitcoin offer us an escape valve from these calamitous consequences, and how does it need to be implemented within society? Does it need to be recognized as a de facto currency in all over the world? Does it need to be like the new global reserve status? How does that look like?
Game theory will take us there because it provides an incentive for some countries to go early. Here's a way to look through technology that lens applied to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin would look a lot like the internet itself. Decentralized open protocol that you could build on top of. Right? And there's nothing that can stop it. It's just going to keep on going. And so it's like being able to invest in the internet itself. So let's take the internet as an example. If you wind yourself back 30 years, was it all the big companies at the time that understood the internet? Or was it the new entrepreneurs? Was it the bottom-up approach to the internet that said, I can solve people's problems in a totally different way? The Googles, the Amazons, the iPhone, like all of the different things that came on top of the internet were entrepreneurs solving it in a different way. And if you look at the top companies in the world today, they're all internet companies based on top of that open decentralized protocol. That's what's happening today, and it's a bottoms up movement instead of a top down. We tend to give the existing incumbent political machine, state, all a government is a collection of our ideas. They make just as many mistakes and everything else, but we think about these. All Kodak was a collection of people driving in a certain direction. And what ends up happening is, as the structure of the system drives them in one area, they can't see the massive improvement to society that comes through something that changes their power structure. So they try to block it, but it can't stop it because it's us. We build on top of it. So I just started a venture capital company to only invest in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Why? Because how much return people are going to make there, and how the entrepreneurs that are going to build the future, it's all going to be on top of that infrastructure.
What does a Bitcoin ecosystem look like? What's going on, through Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin, you can solve for security, decentralization, and scalability on a triangle. Bitcoin's, but you can't have all three, kind of in a layer protocol. So Bitcoin solved for decentralization and security. And they sacrificed scalability on layer one because you have to sacrifice a whole bunch of competing blockchains, sacrificed security or decentralization and went for scalability. And that scalability, so you hear Ethereum and a system building on top of it, but that system, because the base structure has to be more and more centralized over time, or some competing chains less secure over time. It's just a structure of it itself. So what that means is I can see the economic value, the short-term economic value in entrepreneurs building on some of those other coins, but they all go to zero eventually, because today what's happened through the Lightning Network layer 2 solutions and layer 3 solutions, an entire ecosystem that's going to be built on top of Bitcoin, is you apply the scaling solutions on top of a protocol that's constant, that's forever decentralized and secure. And now that the scaling solutions are now through Taproot, through Taro that is just coming out, now that scaling solutions can be built on top of a protocol that can't change, the entrepreneurial talent's going to race in on top of the main protocol, and it's going to look like a resurgence of what happened in the 90s and early 2000s around the internet.
So because the things that Bitcoin does right, it does so well, such as the security, and obviously it's finite supply, and obviously the fact that no one can control it. Those fundamental aspects, the fact that other chains can move around at way faster speeds, and that people will say, well, Ethereum has all these different applications being built on that. That's a far more limiting strength than Bitcoin's core strengths. But then Bitcoin can also, given enough time with some of these layer 2 solutions, be able to replicate what Ethereum has.
A little different than you say, not different strengths.
Okay.
The strength that Ethereum has makes it have to be centralized. And so effectively all the entrepreneurs that are building on top of it, that are building on quicksand, because the rules have to be changed. They will be changed. So you have to trust in a governing body for your entire business that they won't change the rules, and they will change the rules. They have to.
Why would they have to?
Because the structure of the centralization, some people win, some people don't. It looks like our fiat system today. The rules have to change over time. So the trade-offs in those things. So the elegant design of Bitcoin allows the primary layer to be secure, decentralized, and the scaling solutions built on top of it. Similar to the internet. Remember when it didn't allow video conferencing?
Right.
Right. That's a layer on top of an open protocol, and it's a technology layer and as it scaled, made it easier and easier to do more things. That's what's happening in Bitcoin.
And you think that the way it will play itself out in terms of being able to offer solutions for large amounts of people is essentially by an organic movement, more and more people joining it, more and more companies maybe having more reserves in it, and then eventually it'll sort of achieve a de facto monetary status. Doesn't really, and the government will follow suit afterwards.
So if you think about how fast Lightning is scaling as a peer-to-peer money right now, and remember 5 years ago, people talk about Bitcoin only as an asset and not as money. Think about how many people are using it in El Salvador. I was just there as money. Think about, I'm transferring money right now from a Lightning wallet to other people around the world. And it's so simple, and it doesn't go through a existing infrastructure, and then the cost is nothing. So it becomes easier and easier to use. So today, and this is why the internet example is so important. We tend to not understand technology moves into the background, and the products that make it easier for us to access that technology move into the foreground. So what's happening is Bitcoin's hard for a lot of people. They don't want to do the work to understand how it changes everything. And similarly, they probably wouldn't have wanted to work out TCP/IP
Right.
would change everything else. And when they first looked at TCP/IP, that experiment of moving information from this university to this, what good is that? But as entrepreneurs start to build on top of it and make the UI, the UX better, and all the solutions come on top of it, we engage through technology, through products to make our lives better. We're just at the start of that wave on top of Bitcoin.
Invariably, then Bitcoin just gets more and more of the fiat money supply. As more people say, I'm not going to have a bank. There's no need for me to keep 80% of my money in cash or whatever, cash and cash-like assets. Let me just put it in here.
Because you're doing that based on trust, and that trust at 15% inflation rate. Like, why are you trusting your money in cash when you know the cash has to be devalued? It's kind of illogical.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the El Salvador example play out. I think another sort of mid-sized country is probably going to be next. Maybe another country in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and it almost doesn't matter where and how this looks. It's going to be, and there are going to be some failures of companies in the space and such as well, just like there was in the internet boom in the 1990s. But every experiment makes it stronger and stronger, and every experiment on top of it makes it stronger and stronger as more and more people understand it's important, and more people, even if you just looked at yourself. I'll bet you 5 years ago you didn't own it or understand its importance, and now you're telling people why it's important. And so that infection, that idea virus that is spreading as more and more people start to engage it and understand how important it is pretty hard. I'd say impossible to stop.
Right. Yeah. I mean, myself example, 5 years ago is when I first started buying it, I believe. And yeah, it was 20. Well, it was actually right after the Great Crash, right? So like it went up to that $17,000, $18,000 threshold. Then when it went back down to about 3 to 4 range, I started to read into it, and then later on I bought it maybe like a year after that. But I didn't understand the philosophical components behind it. I just thought, oh, this is interesting,
And that's what ends up happening. And as you start to understand it at a deeper and deeper level, once you understand that, you look at people that were exactly like your former self, and you wonder, how can't they get this, right? And it's just how we learn. The same reason why most of the monopolies before the internet don't exist today, because new people took that because they were open to the learning.
You bring up some very plausible alarm bells as we discussed. Obviously, we're also in an era where the Chinese Communist Party is a very strong, powerful force, and there is a totalitarian wave as well that's certainly existing in society today that's still strong. And China has sort of perfected that weird balance of being a tech superpower and combining it with authoritarianship. And obviously that's going to expand to other places as well. Meanwhile, you have Bitcoin, which is the antidote to that, as well as our own failings as a society.
So it's important to because that sounds awfully scary, and it's important to investigate what you just said at a deeper level. So how did that happen? China had cheap labor. They pegged the currency to U.S. currency, so the U.S. currency had essentially high cost labor,
right,
and high spending buyers, purchasers. China had manufacturing and developed their manufacturing capability because of a balance of trade by pegging their labor rate low against a high labor rate. And what they did to keep interest rates low is a flow of funds back to U.S. and U.S. treasuries. Because if they didn't do that, if they didn't essentially do vendor financing, then interest rates would have exploded in U.S. and U.S. would have collapsed. But if U.S. collapsed, China would have collapsed because it's just two sides of the same coin. So in that, there's never been a country that's grown debt GDP faster than China. That's the known debt. Forget all the black pools and everything else. So most of China's miracle is a result of a binge of unrepayable debt. But let's just carry this on for a second. And then in 2015, China realized that the U.S. couldn't pay back their bills. They wouldn't pay back their bills. So they stopped buying treasuries, and they started investing in Belt and Road, other countries, rare earth minerals, things needed for the technology exposure, because they wanted to protect their money. So they used the US's currency against the US by continuing to peg their labor rate low and hollowing out the US to build their dominance. And they're just as at risk they're more at risk in a free market. So if a free market removes the control out of their in control, so people think their dominance is gained from kind of a manipulation of money as well, and that gain. And now, if you went to a free market, which Bitcoin is going to enable all over the world, then what does China do to stop that?
Mm-hmm. What can they do?
What can they do? They can't do anything. And so if you keep on this system, you get geopolitical adversaries that have to go to war to be able to fight. You have a Schelling point based on global competition. In game theory, if people look up Schelling point. And if you move to Bitcoin, you have a Schelling point that moves to global cooperation.
What do you think about, by the end of the decade, what Bitcoin adoption will look like in terms of ballpark numbers of people using it, or people at least using it as a savings vehicle? Because you can map it out through the tracking of the internet, and obviously Bitcoin's going at a faster rate than the internet. So how do you see that going by 2030?
I see it the same. But for the next billions of people, it'll be done through products that make their lives better and economic value that makes their lives better. So what's happening today is what people use Lightning to pay for things. It's because they're saving money, and companies are going to implement it because it saves 2.5 or 3% credit card fees.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so how do you stop that? The economic value to use it is so great that people are going to use it, and that's going to bring more and more people in.
So it's going to be through convenience rather through trying to win people off philosophically first. Because it's like, I don't have to use Western Union anymore, and then they can start to understand some of the stuff we've been talking about.
That's why I say so the Palm Pilot was virtually the same thing as the iPhone 10 years before, but it was useless. Nobody used it. And then technology made it easier to use, and there was no instruction manual with the iPhone. It just was elegant, simple design, and everybody used it. And remember, and that's actually how the free market works too. We can't see these things that change our minds instantly, and we would never predict how we would change before. Because when the iPhone came in, I still remember having a BlackBerry and saying, "No way, I'm using that toy. I need my buttons on my phone."
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
and I love the buttons. And then we all, I love the buttons. And then something gave us more value that we couldn't see 5 days before, and we changed. And then we thought, why did we ever use a thing with buttons? So if that's the free market force that we can't see coming, and then we change our minds in an instant, I will guarantee you can't see what's about to happen on Bitcoin, on all the different creative ideas that are coming and all the products that are going to make your life better for that very same reason. And it's those products, it's those interactions with technology that bring on the billions.
That's a hopeful note to end on then. Bitcoin brings hope. Jeff Booth, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to chat with you and finally meet you. And where can people find more about you and keep up with your work?
The best is just on Twitter, at Jeff Booth on Twitter.
And the name of the book again?
Is The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is Key to an Abundant Future.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for being on. It's a real pleasure, man. And best luck with everything. And I will be following everything you do for sure. So
thanks, Ashton.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks for listening, and we will be back next week.
We're going to talk about the issues that really matter. Our country, our economy, the Fed, QE, GDP, BTC, NFTs, AOC, the CCP, Cardi B, Yeezy, Yellow Socks, Iran, Joe Biden's dementia, come on, man, and probably sex robots. We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas. And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler. What? Let's get started.